There are these specific spots on Earth where certain health conditions just seem, well, concentrated. It's fascinating.
It really is, like little medical mysteries tied to geography.
Exactly. And today we're diving into one of those, X-linked dystonia Parkinsonism, XDP. It's also known locally as Lubag,
Mm-hmm.
and it has this incredibly strong presence on Panay Island in the Philippines. Get this, in one province there, Capiz, it hits about 1 in every 4,000 men.
Wow, that's a striking statistic.
Isn't it? So, okay, let's unpack this. We're going to really focus on explaining what XDP is, especially this is the first time you're hearing about it.
Right, and if you are new to XDP, there are a few core things to kind of grasp up front. It usually starts in adulthood. It's progressive, meaning it gets worse over time.
Okay.
And crucially, it involves this mix of movement issues. You've got dystonia, those involuntary muscle contractions causing twisting, repetitive movements, sometimes odd postures.
Right, the Lubag, the twist.
Exactly. And then you also get Parkinsonism. So think slowness, balance problems, that sort of thing.
And the X-linked part. That sounds important.
Oh, definitely. It's a huge clue about how it's inherited. We'll absolutely get into that.
Great. And just so you know, the information we're drawing on today, it comes from, well, years of really dedicated research, clinical observations, genetic studies.
The huge amount of work has gone into understanding this condition.
For sure. So our goal here is pretty simple. Walk you through what XDP is, what it looks like for people affected, and what the researchers have figured out so far. Make it clear, make it understandable.
Sounds good. Where should we start? Maybe how it was first noticed.
Perfect. Let's go back to the beginning. How did this condition even get recognized?
Well, it really started back in the late 1960s, maybe early 70s. There was a doctor, Dr. George Viterbo, in Roxas City, Capiz,
Okay, in Panay.
right in the heart of it. And he started noticing that an unusual number of men from the island had this strange movement disorder. At first, they thought it might be something called dystonia musculorum deformans, which is a known but rare condition.
So an initial misclassification, maybe?
Sort of. But Dr. Viterbo was really key. He referred these early cases to the neurology department at the Philippine General Hospital. He flagged that something unusual was happening.
That really shows how important sharp clinical observation is, doesn't it? Just noticing a pattern.
Absolutely. That initial noticing set everything else in motion.
So how did we get from those first observations to understanding XDP as its own distinct thing?
A huge step forward was a paper published in 1976. Lee and his colleagues described 28 adult men,
Okay.
all with torsion dystonia. And importantly, 23 of them were from Panay Island.
Ah, so the geographic link was clear even then.
Very clear. And another critical finding in that paper was how it seemed to be passed down. They noted there was no male-to-male transmission. Fathers weren't passing it directly to their sons.
Which it points towards.
Exactly. It strongly suggested a sex-linked recessive inheritance pattern tied to the X chromosome.
Got it. So the inheritance pattern was a big clue early on. And the name, how did it become XDP?
Right, because initially it was mostly seen as dystonia. But as they studied more cases, it became obvious that Parkinsonism was also a major feature for many.
So a combined picture.
Precisely. So in 1991, Lee and the team published again, this time based on 42 male cases. They really emphasized this combination of dystonia and Parkinsonism.
And that's when the name changed.
That's when they proposed the name we use now. Sex-linked, recessive, dystonia, Parkinsonism, XDP.
Makes sense. And what about Lubag? You mentioned that's the local name.
Yeah, Lubag. It means to twist in Ilongo, the language spoken there. Apparently, Dr. Stanley Fawn, a prominent neurologist, helped bring that local name to wider attention. It's so descriptor, isn't it?
It really is. Lubag, you immediately get a sense of the twisting movements. Okay, so let's talk demographics. Who gets XDP and where is it really concentrated?
Well, the pattern is incredibly striking. It's overwhelmingly male. The data from around 2000, updated in 2010, showed a male-to-female ratio of something like 99-1.
Wow, 99-1. That's huge.
It's incredibly skewed. Before 1992, actually, only male cases had even been reported. Since then, a handful of female cases have been identified, but it's still very rare in women.
Really underscores that X-linked part again.
Absolutely. And geographically, that concentration on Panay Island is just undeniable.
How concentrated are we talking?
Okay, so around 2001, the prevalence on Panay was about 5 cases per 100,000 people. But compare that to the rest of the Philippines, it was less than half a case per 100,000.
Big difference.
Huge. And then you zoom into Panay itself, and the province of Capiz just lights up.
That's where the 1 in 4,000 men figure comes from.
Exactly. In 2001, Capiz was already high, nearly 19 per 100,000. By 2010, it was over 23 per 100,000. That translates to roughly 1 in 4,000 men in that specific province.
Incredible. What about other parts of Panay?
Aklan, which used to be part of Capiz, also has a higher rate, but places like Iloilo and Antique have much lower rates, closer to the general Philippine population.
It's like a genetic hotspot.
It really is. And it makes Panay, especially Capiz, such a unique place to study how these rare genetic conditions can kind of take hold and spread within a population.
Makes sense. What about family history? Is it common for people with XDP to have relatives with it?
Oh, absolutely. A positive family history is reported in like over 90% of cases.
Very high.
Extremely high. And it's quite common to see multiple brothers in the same family affected.
Okay. And does it ever show up outside the Philippines?
It does, but there's usually a connection back. There are reports of cases, say, in North America or elsewhere, but typically these individuals have maternal ancestry that traces right back to Panay.
So it all points back to that origin on the island.
Exactly. It strongly supports that idea of a shared genetic origin, a founder effect, which we can talk more about later.
Okay, good. So let's shift to the clinical side. If you were meeting someone with XDP, how does it typically start? How does it look?
Well, it usually kicks off in adulthood. The average age of onset is around 39 or 40 years old.
So middle age, often.
Yeah, third or fourth decade typically. But there's a range. It's been seen as early as 12 and as late as 64.
And those few female cases you mentioned.
They tend to have a later onset, usually after age 46 or so.
Interesting. And what are the very first signs?
For the vast majority, about 94%, it starts as focal dystonia.
Meaning in one specific body part.
Exactly, one area. The most common starting point is actually the lower limbs.
Oh, okay. Like the feet or legs.
Yep. Followed by the craniofacial area, head and face, then neck and shoulders, then upper limbs, and less often the trunk.
Can you give some examples? What would focal dystonia look like in, say, the legs?
Sure. You might see someone's big toe involuntarily bending upwards, or maybe foot twisting or shaking. Sometimes it affects their gait. Their walk becomes unusual because of muscle contractions.
Okay. And in the face?
Could be blepharospasm that's forceful, involuntary eye blinking or closure, or maybe jaw movements like the jaw opening or closing on its own, or the tongue sticking out.
Right. And neck?
Torticollis is common, where the neck twists to one side. Or stiffness, maybe tremors in the neck or shoulder area.
And arms?
Could be something like writer's cramp, where the hand cramps up when trying to write. Or just unusual postures of the fingers or hand.
And the trunk, though less common initially.
Yeah, it might be involuntary bending forward or backward, or strange contractions of the abdominal muscles.
It sounds like it can really start in many different ways. What happens next? Does it stay focal?
Rarely. One of the hallmarks of XDP is how quickly and widely the dystonia spreads. Yeah, it moves to involve other parts of the body. In almost everyone, like 97%, it spreads. And in a really high percentage, around 84%, it becomes generalized.
Generalized meaning affecting most of the body.
Pretty much. And this often happens within just 2 to 5 years after the first symptom appears.
2 to 5 years, that seems quite fast.
It is, especially compared to some other dystonias. And it tends to generalize regardless of where it started initially.
Wow. Okay, so what does that generalized stage look like?
It often becomes quite severe. You see involvement of the axial muscles, the trunk muscles, making posture difficult. And oromandibular dystonia affecting the jaw and mouth is usually very prominent and can be quite disabling.
So widespread, severe twisting and contortions.
That's often the picture, unfortunately. It can make finding any comfortable position really challenging.
And then there's the Parkinsonism component, the slowness, the balance issues. When does that typically come into play?
That usually emerges later on, typically beyond the 10th year of the illness.
Okay, so dystonia first, then Parkinsonism later, generally.
That's the common pattern. You might see bradykinesia, that slowness of movement, postural instability, which affects balance and coordination, maybe a shuffling gait, sometimes called a festinating gait, where steps get faster and smaller.
Again, typical Parkinson's disease.
Similar features, yes. Also, blepharospasm can persist or appear, and a masked face sees that reduced facial expression.
Do the Parkinsonia features replace the dystonia, or do they coexist?
Often they coexist for a period. Sometimes later on, the Parkinsonism might become the more dominant feature, but the dystonia usually doesn't disappear completely.
Is the Parkinsonism in XDP identical to Parkinson's disease?
Not entirely. For instance, significant rigidity or that cogwheel-like stiffness you often feel in Parkinson's patients. That seems less frequent or prominent in XDP.
Interesting distinction. So it sounds like you could almost describe phases of the illness.
That's a pretty good way to think about it, yeah. You often have an early phase that's primarily dystonic, then a middle phase where dystonia and Parkinsonism overlap, and then maybe a later phase where Parkinsonism is more prominent.
And the timing can vary, but the general progression is there.
Right. The rapid spread of dystonia early on is quite characteristic.
What about cognitive function? Thinking, memory, is that affected?
Generally, significant cognitive deficits aren't considered a core feature of XDP. Most individuals retain their cognitive abilities.
That's something, at least.
It is, although it's worth noting that psychotic episodes have been reported in a small minority of cases. The level of physical disability, though, can become profound, ranging from people still able to work to needing wheelchairs or even being bedridden in later stages.
It paints a picture of a really tough, progressive condition. Okay, so if a doctor suspects XDP, how do they confirm it? Are there specific diagnostic tests?
Right now, the diagnosis is still mainly clinical.
Meaning based on symptoms and history.
Exactly. It comes down to observing those characteristic involuntary movements, getting a clear family history, particularly looking for affected male relatives on the mother's side.
Because it's X-linked.
Precisely. And that crucial link, maternal ancestry tracing back to Panay Island, given how localized it is, that piece is really key.
So no single blood test or scan says, yes, this is XDP.
Not definitively, no. Routine lab work, blood tests, metabolic studies, they don't show anything specific for XDP. Same for things like EEG, brainwave tests, or EMG, nerve and muscle conduction studies. They're generally non-specific.
But you mentioned imaging earlier. What about brain scans like MRI? Can they help?
They can provide supportive evidence, yes, especially as the condition progresses. MRI findings can actually differ depending on the stage of the illness.
Okay, what might you see early on when it's mostly dystonia?
In those earlier stages, the MRI might even look normal, or it might show just mild atrophy, some shrinkage of the caudate and putamen.
Those are parts of the basal ganglia, important for movement control.
Correct. But sometimes, even early on, you can see a characteristic sign on certain MRI sequences, T2-weighted images. It looks like bilateral, curved bright spots, increased signal intensity right on the outer rims of the putamen.
Huh. Is that unique to XDP?
Interestingly, no. A somewhat similar pattern can sometimes be seen in Wilson's disease, another movement disorder.
That's fascinating. Different cause, but maybe affecting similar brain circuits.
Possibly. It's one of those intriguing overlaps that researchers look at. It doesn't confirm XDP, but it's a supportive finding in the right clinical context.
Okay, and what about later stages, when Parkinsonism is more prominent?
Then the MRI changes usually become more obvious. You tend to see more significant atrophy, moderate to severe shrinkage of both the putamen and the head of the caudate nucleus.
So definite structural changes.
Yes. And because that brain tissue is lost, the nearby fluid-filled spaces, the frontal horns of the ventricles, might look enlarged. That's called ex vacuo dilatation. The remaining putamen itself can sometimes look like just a thin slit with a very bright signal on the MRI.
Any parallels there, like the Wilson's disease similarity earlier?
Yeah, this later pattern with the severe striatal atrophy has been noted to have some resemblance to what can be seen in juvenile Huntington's disease.
Wow, so the MRI reflects the disease progression, showing that damage accumulates in those key basal ganglia structures.
Exactly. It helps visualize what's happening structurally.
What about PET scans? Those look more at brain function, right?
Here.
Glucose metabolism or dopamine activity.
Right. PET studies have been done in XDP research. Some have shown reduced glucose metabolism, specifically in the striatum again, pointing to dysfunction in those basal ganglia areas.
Makes sense. What about dopamine, since Parkinsonism is involved?
That's where it gets a bit more complex. Studies using fluorodopa PET, which measures dopamine synthesis capacity, have had somewhat mixed results in XDP.
Mixed how?
Some studies found normal fluorodopa uptake, suggesting the Parkinsonism might not be due to the classic loss of dopamine-producing cells we see in Parkinson's disease. But other studies have shown reduced uptake, which would be consistent with involvement of that nigrostriatal dopamine pathway.
So the exact role or mechanism of dopamine system dysfunction in XDP might be different or more variable than in typical Parkinson's.
It seems that way. It suggests the underlying pathology might be more complex, and it's still an active area of investigation.
Okay, and what about looking directly at the brain tissue after death? Neuropathology, what does that show?
Postmortem studies have been really important. They consistently show atrophy, that shrinkage in the caudate nucleus and the putamen.
The same areas highlighted by MRI.
Exactly. And the severity of this atrophy seems to correlate with how long the person had the illness. Longer duration, more atrophy.
And under the microscope.
You see neuronal loss, fewer nerve cells, and astrogliosis, which is basically an increase in certain support cells, a kind of scarring response in those same areas, the putamen and caudate.
So clear evidence of damage there. What about other brain regions, like the substantia nigra, which is key in Parkinson's?
Interestingly, most reports indicate that other regions, including the cerebral cortex, the thalamus, and even the substantia nigra, appear relatively unremarkable or much less affected in XDP compared to the caudate and putamen.
So the damage seems quite focused on the striatum, the caudate and putamen.
That appears to be the primary site of neurodegeneration, yes,
Yeah.
which gives researchers important clues about the specific circuits being targeted by whatever the underlying disease process is.
Okay, let's circle back to the genetics then. We know it's X-linked recessive. What else do we know about the gene itself?
Right, so the X-linked recessive pattern is key. It means the gene is on the X chromosome. A male gets one X from his mother, so if he inherits the faulty copy, he typically gets the condition. A female gets two X's, so if she inherits one faulty copy, she's usually a carrier, though as we learn more, some carriers might have subtle signs.
Okay. And you mentioned the founder effect earlier.
Yes, that's the leading theory for why XDP is so common, specifically in Panay. The idea is that probably long ago, a single individual, the founder, had the original mutation, this specific genetic change.
Yeah, because the population was relatively isolated.
Exactly. That specific mutation became much more common in subsequent generations within that geographic area than it would be elsewhere. It's like a genetic bottleneck effect.
And the cases outside the Philippines tracing back to Panay support this.
Strongly. It all points to a single ancestral mutation originating there.
So have scientists actually found the specific gene responsible?
They've made huge progress locating it. We know the gene, designated DYT3, is on the X chromosome in a region called XQ13.1.
XQ13.1. That sounds very specific.
It is. And through painstaking genetic mapping studies over the years, looking at affected families, tracking shared genetic markers.
Like genetic signposts?
Kind of, yeah. They've narrowed down the location of DYT3 to a much smaller segment within XQ13.1. We're talking less than 350,000 base pairs of DNA code now.
That sounds tiny in the grand scheme of the genome.
It is. It's a real testament to genetic linkage analysis. So researchers know where the gene is, roughly.
But do they know exactly which gene it is within that segment and what's wrong with it?
That's the million-dollar question they're still working on. There are several candidate genes within that narrowed-down region. Scientists are actively investigating them, trying to pinpoint the specific gene and understand the exact protein defect that leads to XDP. Some candidates have already been ruled out.
So the hunt is still on for the precise culprit gene.
It is. Finding it will be a major breakthrough for understanding the disease mechanism and potentially developing targeted therapies.
Absolutely. Which brings us to treatment. What's available now for people living with XDP?
This is, unfortunately, a really challenging area. Despite a lot of effort, there's currently no treatment that consistently works to stop the disease or even significantly slow its progression.
What was that?
No cure, no disease-modifying therapy yet. Many different types of oral medications have been tried, drugs used for seizures, antihistamines, anticholinergics, often used in Parkinson's, antipsychotics.
A wide range.
Yeah, basically trying anything that might affect movement control or neurotransmitter systems. But none have really provided sustained, significant benefit for most patients.
That must be incredible.
If someone has, say, severe blepharospasm, the involuntary eye closure, or difficult oromandibular dystonia affecting the jaw, injecting Botox directly into those overactive muscles can temporarily weaken them and reduce the involuntary movements.
But it's temporary.
Yes, the effect wears off after a few months, so injections need to be repeated. And it only addresses specific focal symptoms. It doesn't help the generalized dystonia or the Parkinsonism, and it certainly doesn't change the underlying disease.
What about surgery? Has that been tried?
Surgical approaches like thalamotomy or pallidotomy, procedures that involved creating lesions in specific brain areas, were tried in some cases historically.
With what results?
Generally, the results were limited and often came with significant risks and complications. Cerebellar implantation was also tried without success. More recently, there's been some interest in deep brain stimulation, or DBS.
DBS is used in Parkinson's and other dystonias sometimes, right?
Exactly. It involves implanting electrodes in specific brain targets. There have been a few reports suggesting potential benefit in isolated XDP cases, but it's still very early days. Much more research is needed to see if DBS is truly effective and safe for XDP more broadly.
So treatment options remain very limited, highlighting that urgent need for more research.
Absolutely. Finding effective treatments is a top priority.
Let's talk a bit about the wider impact. You mentioned the concentration in Panay. What has the experience been like for patients and families there? Especially historically, was there stigma?
Oh, definitely. Historically, there was significant stigma associated with XDP in Panay,
Why was that?
largely because of the visible, often severe and unusual involuntary movements caused by the dystonia. In some communities, unfortunately, these symptoms led to misunderstandings, fear, even superstitions linking the condition to, well, mythical beings or curses.
That sounds awful. How did people cope?
It often led to social isolation. Families might try to hide the affected individual. Sometimes people changed their names or even moved away from the island entirely to escape the embarrassment or judgment.
Wow.
And it wasn't uncommon for the condition to be deliberately misreported as Parkinson's disease, which maybe carried less stigma at the time.
Heartbreaking. Has that situation improved?
Thankfully, yes, things have gotten better over time. A really positive development has been the formation of lay support groups.
Bringing families together.
Exactly. Sharing experiences, providing mutual support. Also, increased attention from local government and health organizations has helped raise awareness and reduce that crippling stigma.
Have these efforts made a tangible difference?
It seems so. For instance, suicide rates among patients, which were tragically high in the past, likely due to factors like reactive depression, feeling abandoned, the severity of the condition, those rates have reportedly decreased, which is likely linked to this increased support and awareness.
That's a significant positive change. But the underlying challenges remain.
Yes. The economic impact, for one, can be devastating. XDP often strikes people in their 30s or 40s, right at the peak of their working lives.
Making it hard to support their families.
Extremely hard, often impossible. And while counseling is important, it's faced challenges too, partly due to the lack of easy genetic diagnostic tests historically, and that lingering social stigma we talked about.
It's clearly a condition with deep medical, social, and economic roots and consequences. Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive, let's summarize. For someone hearing about XDP for the first time today, what are the absolute key takeaways?
I'd say remember this. XDP is a unique mix of dystonia and Parkinsonism. It typically starts in adult men and gets progressively worse. It's strongly linked to Panay Island in the Philippines, especially Capiz province.
And the inheritance.
It follows an X-linked recessive pattern. Researchers have narrowed down the gene's location, but are still hunting for the specific gene and defect. And crucially, effective treatments are still urgently needed.
That covers the essentials well. Now, reflecting on all this, is there one aspect of XDP that you personally find particularly puzzling or intriguing? A key unanswered question.
For me, it's that typical progression. Adult-onset dystonia, followed years later by Parkinsonism. It's quite an unusual sequence compared to what we often expect with basal ganglia disorders.
How so?
Well, there's a general pattern sometimes seen where basal ganglia lesions in childhood might lead more to dystonia, while adult-onset problems lean more towards Parkinsonism. XDP kind of flips or combines this in a distinct way.
So the question is why?
Exactly. What are the specific molecular or circuit-level changes happening over time in XDP that cause this particular transition from a predominantly dystoning picture to one increasingly involving Parkinsonism? Understanding that mechanism feels key.
That's a great point. It highlights how much mystery still surrounds the fundamental biology of XDP. So if listeners want to learn more.
Well, for those interested in the science, delving into the published research is always an option. But perhaps more importantly, I'd encourage seeking out the personal stories, the lived experiences of individuals and families affected by XDP.
To understand the human side.
Absolutely. It gives a much deeper perspective. Ultimately, continued scientific work needs to go hand in hand with community support and awareness as we push for better understanding and hopefully effective treatments.
A powerful closing thought. And for you listening, maybe consider that intricate dance between genetics, geography, and disease.
Yeah.
How these factors can converge to create unique situations like XDP on Panay Island. It really tells a story about human biology and history.